Joshua Ness is a leader in helping academia, enterprise businesses, and startup teams understand how historical, current, and future advancements in communication technology can maximize their industry goals. He's an expert in 5G technology and shares his expertise to inspire businesses to take advantage of emerging technologies such as spatial computing, edge computing, and computer vision. Joshua is also the director of the New York City chapter of Startup Grind, a world leader in convening startups, founders, innovators, and creators. Please welcome to the stage, Joshua Ness.
Goodness. Hey, how are we all doing? Does anyone know what song that was that just played just now? Nope. That was Bush. Those Little Things. That was a great song. I didn't even ask him to play that. That was the perfect song I could have done. Yes, I am Joshua Ness, Verizon 5G Labs, coming to you live. I'm from the big city. I live in Brooklyn. Anybody else from the city? Anybody from Brooklyn? That's what I'm talking about. A couple of things before we get started. I want to say a big thank you to Noah Simons. Are you here in the house? Is Noah here? She's with Upstate Capital, as well as Sam Tickner from Union Hill Advisors for helping to make a ton of introductions. Matt Watson from NYSTAR, great to see you. It was really cool to be part of that Invest NY event around Industry 4.0. If you haven't had a chance to participate in those and they come around again, please definitely do. And then, of course, Elena and her team at FuseHub, who have made all of this very seamless and easy. So thank you to everybody. A tiny bit of housekeeping again before we get started. Does it feel good to be back? Oh my goodness. It's been almost like 2 years. As such, remember that we are rusty. Okay, so like be gentle, be kind, be flexible and forgiving. We're all trying to slide back into this, but we're very, very happy to be back up here and talking about things like this. I am told I'm the only thing standing in between you and lunch. So let's remember that. Be sure to laugh if I say something funny. Laugh harder if I don't. Okay? This is a partnership. Symbiosis, you and me. Okay. Everybody knows what 5G is, right? I can skip over like half these slides, right? Everyone has like a really deep, solid understanding of what 5G is, of what the next generation of connectivity is. No? No? Okay. So we started off with 1G, right? The Zach Morris phone. Anybody know why it's called the Zach Morris phone? Yes, in the back, thank you. Saved by the Bell, one of the greatest shows on TV. He had this 1G phone, he had this brick phone that he used, and that's what taught me as a young, up-and-coming child of the world that, oh, this is normal, this is what we should all aspire to, and all of a sudden here we are, and the kids have phones in schools. And then 2G brought about like texting and the ability to start sending information back and forth in a digital way. And 3G, of course, was the beginnings of data. BlackBerry got really popular in this era because they had a system that allowed for over-the-air syncing of emails and calendar. And up until that point, that had never been done before. Even with the old Palms, you used to have to dock them into a desktop in order to download your messages and your calendar invites, which you could then respond to, but it would still hold them until you synced it again, and then they would all go out, right? And so BlackBerry became really popular because they did over-the-air syncing, but their web experience was pretty limited. Right? And that was a big part of that was because the 3G network that it operated on at the time wasn't really built for massive amounts of data. And so a really amazing thing happened in January of 2007 where this guy got up on stage and he said, one more thing. He said, a new product. It is a next generation iPod. It is a top of the line phone, and it is a revolutionary web browsing experience all in one. and everyone lost their minds. Everyone went crazy. Because the phone represented something that no one had ever seen before, right? And this was still on 3G. This was 07, because 4G didn't come out until about 2010. And so one of the interesting things about the iPhone and smartphones of that era were that they could do something that no phone could do up until that point. They could download large files from the internet, and they had a full web browsing experience. And up until that point, the networks, all of them, had rejected any OEM that wanted to provide these features in a device, because they said, no, it'll bring down our network. No, it'll crash the network. And so here's the iPhone on what was the Singular network, which was then purchased by AT&T. And they held the rights to it for several years, and everyone started buying up the iPhone. Do you know what it did? Crashed the network. Crashed the network a lot. And that's not a knock on any carrier. It's just a simple fact that the network at the time, the 3G network at the time, was not built to handle that kind of data transfer, right? And so much so that even 3 years later, almost 4 years later, this came out in January of 07, 4G was released in December of 2010. The most innovative application, the most innovative connected application that we had on our phones. Anyone remember that far back? You know what it was? Words with Friends. Anyone still play Words with Friends? Nobody. You should. It was great. You could play Scrabble with someone who lived in Tennessee or somebody who lived in Turkey at the same time. This was revolutionary. No one had ever done this before. This was it. And this was how many years ago? Like 11 years ago. This. And so 4G was released, and everyone said, finally, we can do streaming video now. Well, we don't know what we got instead. We got everything that allows us to do everything we do today. From rich communication to all sorts of media to collaborative document sharing. Entire industries were built on the back of 4G. Entire economies were built on the gig economy is a product of 4G. Without connectivity that strings together the myriad devices that we all have to live, work, and play, things like the gig economy don't exist, right? And so the carriers released 4G and kind of sat back while the market built up all these new innovations, everything from Amazon and Facebook and Uber and all of these new companies and all these new technologies that took advantage of that, which is great because it gave us innovation, which is what we're talking about here today. And so now we're here in the 5G era. Like 5G it's here, it's coming. And it's already in a lot of different major cities. There's a few different flavors of 5G, and we'll talk about this in here in just a second. And then we're going to get into what the implications are and where you fit in. So I actually don't like this graphic. I don't like this use case example. Because when's the last time anyone downloaded a movie to your phone? Put your hand down. People download movies to their phone when they have no expectation of connectivity whatsoever. There's usually somebody in the back of the room who's like, I download movies to my phone when I get on a plane. Of course you do. Because you don't have very good connectivity up there. We stream, right? That's the kind of society we are. So a bit of hardware to get it out of the way. 5G requires an entire reimagining of the network. It's built from the ground up. If the 1G through 4G was building new wings and new floors on a house, 5G is essentially tearing down the house and building an entirely new house on its foundation. We can talk about non-standalone versus standalone. I'm not going to bore you. But it requires an entirely new method of constructing infrastructure using these small cells that you see there, and entirely new ways of using spectrum, airwaves, right? And so most people, if you're in a decently populated area, you can see that you have 5G on your phone if you have a 5G phone. That's mostly the low band, right? That low frequency, 600 to 800 megahertz, something like that. It performs about on par with 4G, good to go. In a lot of cities, most of the carriers have rolled out what's called millimeter wave. And that's way up in the high end of the spectrum, right? And that's where we're starting to get 2 gigs, 3 gigs per second. There was just a test done recently by a carrier where they achieved 4.9 gigabits per second download, which is insane. The most that you get on a 4G connection is about 80 megabits per second, or 200 or so megabits per second, right? Somewhere in that range. If you're in a really dense area, you might get about 100, 150 megabits per second. And now we're already testing 5G and getting almost 5 gigabits per second. Now that has huge implications for a lot of things, more than just the device that you carry in your pocket. And we're gonna talk about this in just a little bit and why I think this is a device that's on borrowed time. And then in that mid-band, you've heard a lot of people talking about mid-band spectrum. A lot of the carriers spent a bunch of money on mid-band spectrum. Sometimes it's called C-band. Sometimes you hear it called sub-6. This has it's almost like the Goldilocks. It's faster than the low band, and it's more versatile than the high-band technologies are. So it comes in a couple of different flavors. One of them is called fixed wireless access. This is the idea that we can take 5G and we can beam it into homes and businesses. We can beam it into factories, right? We can usurp the need for drilling in new cable, laying in new fiber, things like that. And we can start providing multi-gigabit high-speed broadband into structures by just beaming it into the windows. And this has a lot of implications for how we think about things like rapidly scaling operations is the big one there. Working remotely and schooling kids at home, we all know what that was like when the kids need to use video and we're trying to work at home and then someone is trying to watch a movie and the network just kind of goes down, right? So this type of technology would fix that. And then you have the idea that 5G can be streamed to the devices themselves, right? Using things like SIM cards, and so your phones can get native 5G the same way they've been getting 4G and 3G and everything else. Now, I have this up here because I think that and I'll go into why, I think that the idea of streaming 5G to devices is going to move beyond this thing very, very quickly. And we're going to get to a point where we have an ecosystem of devices on our persons and in our spheres where we can do something like be walking down the street and realize that, oh, my favorite soccer team, West Ham United, is playing in the Champions League and actually doing quite well. And there's a game going on right now and I want to put on my mixed reality headset and get the view from the field as they kick that game-winning goal. What I'm describing is not hard to do. We have the technology to do it now. So 5G does quite a few things that 4G doesn't. These like 8 capabilities, or we call them currencies, right? And the big ones, the highlights, the ones everyone knows are things like throughput, high throughput and low latency, things like ultra reliability, low latency communications, URLLC. Then there's some back-end stuff like service deployment and energy efficiency, which are, yes, very, very good. And they will all come together to have an impact on how we start thinking about the evolution of these devices and the evolution of the services that we provide and the evolution of your companies. Now, there's some really good ones here that start to dive into some of those use cases. On the left there, you can see those connected devices, things like connected wearables and IoT sensors. And this is going to have a big impact on a lot of the work that I think y'all are doing. Ultimately, we're trying to drive the 4th industrial revolution. And this isn't something that the carriers are using as a marketing term. This is something that actually gets talked about in places like Davos, Switzerland, right, at the World Economic Forum. It is clear and it's understood that advancements in connectivity capabilities will bring about new types of technology that usher in this digital and physical merger. There's a big word for that being thrown around these days. Anyone know what that is? Metaverse. Yeah. The idea that we exist in a physical space, but we can also exist in a digital space, and those two can merge together in new ways. And we're just starting to explore that. And something that people aren't really talking about is this requires wireless connectivity. It requires something like 5G. And the idea is to bring about, I know this font is really small, I apologize, these next generation capabilities. Because when you have foundational technologies and you combine them with emerging technology platforms, you get entirely new use cases that can scale for your users and your customers. And we'll talk a little bit about those. So the idea is that there are ways that we can bring about changes and bring about advancements in consumer industries and in industrial industries, right? So on the consumer side, we have what the last speaker was talking about, things like gaming. 5G has huge impacts on gaming. In Los Angeles, we actually sponsor an esports league called Dignitas, and they have a training facility in our 5G lab in Los Angeles. And they practice over 5G, and that's actually a huge benefit for them. And then there are other types of supporting technologies that layer on top of 5G that will start to give you all new ideas about how to use this technology to drive innovation. Now that's something to think about, because as a connectivity medium, 5G is almost like a layer that things can be built on top of. There are other supporting technologies like multi-access edge computing, which we'll go into in just a second, that then can spawn new things like artificial intelligence and advanced and industrial IoT, right? That we can start bringing about this sensorization so that facilities like, whether it's a facility like this or a facility like a factory or a facility like a restaurant, can start using sensors to bring in data, combining that with artificial intelligence for better decision making. And so I talked about multi-access edge computing, sometimes called MEC, every now and then referred to as mobile edge computing. I'm going to spend just a second talking about this, because this gets really important, and it gets into why these types of devices are going to change. And a lot of the work that you're doing is about to evolve, and why you need to be paying attention to it. So everyone knows what the cloud is, right? The cloud is a set of compute capabilities for things like storage, processing, rendering, all of this stuff that exists in the ether, right? Everyone has applications on their phone that deal with cloud capabilities. The emails on your phone, the photos in your Instagram, they're not on your device. They're located in the cloud. They're located where Google servers are, where Facebook and Instagram servers are, right? They're out there on the periphery, right? They might be located on the coasts. They might have regions within other parts of the country. Heck, you might even be accessing cloud servers internationally. The issue with not necessarily knowing where they are or having them be quite so far away is that it results in latency. And the capabilities of a 4G network, while great and give us everything we have now, aren't sufficient to deliver fully rendered and fully processed information in a manner that can be used by you and your customers, right? Which is why the phone looks the way that it does today. This is a device that is about 13 years old. 14 years old almost. It hasn't really changed very much. It still looks the same. It looks a lot like this because it has to. It has a big giant battery that powers the processor inside, because this device still has to act as its own supercomputer. It still has to process all the stuff that comes from the cloud in its raw form, gets processed here, and then is delivered to you. And that results in latency. And if we're talking about Instagram and refreshing the feed and watching the little circle for a second or two, or firing up a Netflix video and having it buffer for a good 5 seconds, we're okay with that. And if we're in a high-speed autonomous vehicle traveling at 90 miles an hour, wanting to change lanes into traffic where there's another autonomous vehicle and there's like a 1 or a 2 second buffer, we're okay with that, right? No. We need the information to be processed and delivered faster than it is right now in order for us to take this next leap into what's coming next. We'll talk a little bit more about autonomous cars here in just a second. The idea with edge computing is that we can take these cloud capabilities and we can bring them closer, not necessarily at scale. They're not going to be as big and powerful, but they're going to be more available. And we can put these and embed them into the network itself so that we can take these cloud capabilities, bring them to the edge of the network, which, by the way, the edge of the network is this. You are the edge of the network. The end device is the edge of the network. So that the first thing that your device hits when it reaches the wireless radio is an edge server, an edge computer, still embedded in the network. Your signal hasn't gone out into the open internet yet, where it could be accessible by hackers, where it could run through switches and create latency, so that information can be processed, rendered, stored using things like dynamic content caching, and then delivered back to you almost instantly, below 10 milliseconds. For reference, it takes you about 250 milliseconds to blink your eye. And we've tested this, as an industry, we've tested this, and using a connectivity medium like 5G combined with edge computing, we can exceed the performance of on-device compute. I'm going to say that again. Using an advanced connectivity medium like 5G and edge computing capabilities, we can deliver information to your device faster than if your device processed the information itself. And that has huge implications for how we start creating new hardware and new software applications. It has huge implications for security. It has huge implications for reliability. There's a quick diagram. I should have switched to this a second ago, I apologize. The idea that it doesn't need to go out into the open internet unless it requires those resources. And if everyone's doing their job correctly, it very rarely will have to. And I'll make sure that these slides are made available so you can take a deeper look at them. For things like content creation, 5G and edge computing are crucial. How many of y'all deal in physical goods? No one's putting their hand up, but I imagine it's a lot of you. The idea that these things can be digitized and placed into virtual reality, augmented reality, holograms. The metaverse is coming, I promise you, and you will have to adapt. Because if you don't, your competitors will. So it'll behoove you to start thinking about this now. But the idea that these physical objects can be digitized quickly and easily is something that's brand new. Usually that would take days, sometimes even weeks, to digitize entire catalogs of product and make it available for websites or other types of media that your customers want to use. Now what you're seeing here is actually in our lab. It's called a volumetric capture studio. We put Al Roker in there one time. That was fun. But all of these depth sensing cameras can instantly digitize an individual or a person or a thing and make it available for use. Now, we talked about hardware. Hardware it's already changing, and I'll show you a couple of examples of stuff that you can start buying now that will eventually begin to replace the phone. Phone manufacturers are doing their best. They are creating new types of hardware that are appealing to the market, but by and large, these still kind of look like phones. Right? They can bend, they can fold, they do different things, they have new capabilities, but they're still kind of just phones, right? We're still talking about the same sensory inputs and outputs from these devices that we've had for the past 14 years. Sight, speech, hearing, haptics. And there have been some attempts to advance. Everyone remembers this guy, right? Anybody remember the name for him? Yeah, the glass hole. Because he was just walking around recording you all the time. And no, I think the industry wasn't quite ready for this, or we weren't quite ready for this. Also, it just looks goofy. Nobody wants to wear that. So, we've started to make advancements, and in the past 5 years, now we have Ray-Ban partnering with Facebook on the ability to have sunglasses that look like these Wayfarers, where you can not only record video and post to your social media, but you can also take phone calls, you can listen to music, you can do tons of things. What about this? What about a heads-up display? Or getting into daily use augmented reality? This is the product that was created. The company was called North, and they were picked up by Google and wrapped up into their spatial computing team. These were on the market, and hopefully we'll see something similar coming out fairly soon, where we can begin deconstructing this device into its component parts, almost like a very expensive key lime pie. You know, when you go to those fancy restaurants and they bring it out to you with like the crushed up graham crackers and then like the key lime filling and then the whipped cream on the side, and it's like key lime pie but like some assembly required. The idea that we could have a visual device, audio devices, haptic devices, we already have advanced wearables on our wrists, and all of this could create an ecosystem for us to experience the world around us in completely new ways. This is getting into the beginning of the metaverse that I was talking about, that everyone's talking about. This idea that physical and digital can exist in the same place. I was part of an arts club in the city, and it focuses a lot on classic art, and recently we had an exhibit on digital art, and it was scanning a QR code and then being able to experience with your device digital art that was anchored in a physical space, right? Which brings to mind the idea of other dimensions, to where we're no longer constrained to just one physical space here, depending on what gets created and what with the types of experience that we want to create for each other. There can be infinite numbers of digital experiences happening in a anchored to a physical space. This type of technology exists now. And this type of wayfinding, the beginnings of it are already on your cell phone. And you can start having augmented reality experiences using your cell phone, and we've created advanced ones using 5G for things like the Oscars or the Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York City. And getting into virtual reality, everybody know the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality? Augmented reality is the idea of having a digital overlay on top of a physical space. Here in the bottom, that's augmented reality. This gets into virtual reality, the idea that you put on a headset, the real world is blacked out, and all you're experiencing is the digital. That's virtual reality. Something like AltSpace VR already allows you to create an avatar of yourself and engage with other people. During the pandemic, I held several startup events in virtual reality. There was even like a networking component, and I can tell you it's just as awkward in VR as it is in person. The audio is spatial, and so as you get closer to a group, their conversation gets louder. And so walking up to a group of people that are already having a conversation, and they arrange themselves in a circle, just like we do. And so standing, like, finding where's the gap, the biggest gap that you can maybe fit into, and they can hear you. And so, like, somebody says something funny, and you're like, ha, 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 ha. And if you have the handsets, you can kind of like wave your hand, and then like hope that they like notice you, and then like, oh, let you into the circle. It's exactly the same. And that's for fun. But we're also going to start dealing with virtual reality for work. That's the point of a lot of what Facebook is trying to do with Horizon, as well as with its other meta platforms that it's currently ramping up for. How do we bring mixed reality into other facets of our lives? A lot of that is going to require wireless connectivity that allows that to happen, and fortunately, we're bringing it. And it's not going to be just for individuals like you and me. It's going to be for larger machines. It's going to be for entire cities. Everyone knows the idea behind this image, that an autonomous vehicle has sensors everywhere, whether that's radar, whether that's LiDAR, whether that's computer vision, night vision, infrared, all of these things, because the car is unto itself an autonomous thing, right? That's what everyone wants you to believe. The car knows. The car don't know shit. We're working, as an industry, working on connected ecosystems, connected cities, connected communities. A big reason for that is because the more information that a community has about what's going on around it, the more that it can supplement and complement the technology that's contained here. Because a car, an autonomous vehicle, isn't going to be fully autonomous. It is going to rely on information coming to it from dozens or hundreds of different sources, contextually processed using edge computing and artificial intelligence algorithms that live on those edge instances. Sounds a lot like Terminator, right? That feed information to that vehicle so it doesn't need to know what's happening 3 feet in front of it, because it already knows what's happening 3 blocks in front of it. It knows that there is a traffic jam happening, and it can automatically reroute. It knows that a car ran a red light, and so it can apply the brakes before a driver would even see it, or before the car would even know. These all require advanced connectivity mediums, and thankfully we're creating them. But this is where the future is going. So we're pulling information from all these different sources, processing them at the edge, delivering them to the entities that need it so they can make good decisions. All right, so let's talk turkey. What does this mean for a lot of the work that we're doing here? We know that manufacturing and robotics is growing. The field is growing, the cost is coming down, the jobs are being created, and people are making money. That's what we're all here to do. And we know that the nature of factory operations is changing. How many open jobs are there out there right now? What's the figure, 10 million? And so a lot of these are going to be jobs that people don't necessarily want to do or they're not qualified to do. They're going to be digitized. And then not all of them are going to be fully digitized. A lot of them are going to be able to be done by people with different sets of skills in different places. The last speaker was talking about remote work and how that's changing in the gaming industry. It's changing everywhere. Look at this robot patrol, the third one. That's a forklift being controlled by somebody in a VR headset who might be in that same facility. Maybe not. They might be at home. Can you imagine being an on-call forklift driver from your couch? Technology's there. It's being applied. It also has big implications for things like quality assurance, things like logistics, things like supply chain. I'm not saying 5G is the answer to the supply chain issues. I mean, it might be. There are lots of ways and lots of things that help us live these lives and will see evolution. They will see advancements. They will see innovation, and the people responsible for that, a lot of them are in this room. And so the goal is to use this connectivity layer, which is here, with these other types of supporting technologies, which are here, and begin stacking them, and begin customizing them, and creating modular capabilities that can be used to drive opportunity, both in the economic and the social scale. One of the things I do and that I'm very proud of over the past couple of years is running social impact accelerators. How does 5G impact climate change or climate mitigation or climate justice? How does 5G impact disability innovation? How can we reimagine what the internet even means so that people who can't necessarily use a cell phone can still access information and live fulfilling lives? Now, this is the crux. I told you all that story so I could tell you this one. Remember what the carriers did with 4G? We released 4G, and then we sat back and went to see what was on television. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was the ecosystem that created all of the advancements that we have right now. And even though the carriers and the industry has realized that, and now we are putting together programs to seek out companies like yours and people like you and innovators like you and your colleagues to work to help create, we know that we can't do it alone. I know a lot about 5G. I don't know a lot about testing soil samples for nutrients like my friend Laura does. So we would want to work together to figure out how we can bring connectivity advancements so that farmers can make better choices using that type of technology. We want to work, and I say this not necessarily just as Verizon, that quite literally is my job, to work with people like you to predict the future. But remember this as you are going about these next 2 days, as you are taking this information back to your colleagues and back to your teams, and you're briefing them or debriefing them on what you learned and what you saw. Make one of those things the idea that advances in technology are here. We need to be thinking about how our companies are going to evolve, and it's going to take all of us. The larger companies, the people who are creating the technologies like Verizon, want to talk to you. We want to work with you. Because we can do a lot of things, but we're not experts in everything. This is my last slide. And it's up here because this is a great way, this is a great example of how we tend as a society to think about innovation. Everybody knows what this is. This is Star Trek. This is the original 1960s Star Trek. William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, God rest his soul. They're holding a tablet. This is in the 60s. Like laptops haven't even been invented yet. But he's holding a tablet. And on that tablet, they have a stylus, and it's essentially an electronic notebook, right? But it was the beginning of what we have now. It was so forward-thinking, the idea that something could be mobile, that could be that could take down electronic information, and then deliver electronic information back to us. So yeah, it kind of looks like a just a mobile yellow tablet. But the thing that I love to notice is those 3 indicators at the top of the tablet. Those are glass-domed light bulbs, right? Because it's how we got information. We've all seen like Apollo 13 and the glass-domed light bulbs that are blinking, warning this and warning that, and 5 by 5 here. I don't even know what that means. But the idea that for them innovation was this tablet that can be carried around, but it's going to have the same types of notification technology that we have today. We're just going to make it mobile. And so those glass-domed light bulbs that are on this piece of advanced technology that's supposed to be happening like 1,000 years in the future. The reason why I like this is because it represents this wall that a lot of people hit when they're thinking about innovation, which is that some things will change, but other things feel like constants. They feel like foregone conclusions. And I'm here to tell you that they're not. And so as you're thinking about the evolution of your companies, as you're thinking about starting those new ventures, recognize that everything is changing and it will ripple. And the things that you think